Welcome to 4 Quarter Lives, a podcast exploring the profound impact of longer lives and careers on everything: countries, companies, couples, and careers. I'm Avivah Wittenberg-Cox, and on this week's 4 Quarter Lives, I talk with Dan Pontefract. Dan's a leadership thinker and prolific author with a gift for turning big, serious organizational problems into memorable language and metaphors leaders can actually use. He's written 5 books on culture, purpose, and leadership, and his next one, The Future of Work is Gray, lands in May 2026. So in this conversation, we go straight at a corporate blind spot that's hiding in plain sight: demographics. While organizations obsess over AI, digital transformation, and quarterly targets, age remains the issue nobody wants to really own until it's too late. Dan names the cost of that neglect age debt and lays out what companies are already paying for: lost knowledge, burnt out middle managers, and a widening mismatch between how we run careers and how long people now live. We also explore Dan's alternative to generational stereotypes, his rivers, rocks, and rubies model, and the leadership move he thinks matters most: becoming both age-aware and then age-invisible. Dan Pontefract, welcome to 4 Quarter Lives. Delighted to have you.
Hi, Avivah. Hi, it's so good to be here. You're such a gem, and I say that with all the reasons you know why. So thank you so much.
A little bit of an outspoken gem. So yes, absolutely. Let's go. Dan, you've written a whole bunch of books. So tell us a bit about them and why this one and why now. How does it sit in your oeuvre, shall we call it?
Oh, wow, that's a great word. Well, first and foremost, a hat tip my wife, Denise. So I write to A, get out of her hair, because I'm that guy with so many questions, and B, she allows me as well. She's a fantastic life partner of almost 31 years now. So hat tip to Denise.
Congratulations. That's a different kind of longevity. We can talk about that another time.
I've always had an itch to scratch. So just quickly about me, I thought I was going to be a doctor. I ended up in academia. After academia, I thought, well, maybe I should go to the real world. And I entered a high-tech firm that eventually became SAP. So through acquisitions, et cetera, I was a chief learning officer in a multi-global, if you will, company everywhere. And then I went to telecom and continued my pursuit of what leadership and people are all about, that intersection in essence. And then I kind of went on my own. So that's kind of my career in a sense, but I've always been...
How old were you when you made the big break to your own self?
Well, that's a great question. So 2018, so what does that mean? I was 37? Does that mean? No, 47. 47.
Oh, yeah, the perfect Q2 to Q3 shift. You're an archetype. You're an archetype.
You made me do math too, so that was important.
In your head, without any... So how many books have you published since?
Yeah.
And what
it was during the time at TELUS, which is a telecom in Canada, very much for those that are listening, like an AT&T in America, British Telecom in the UK. So coast to coast, 38,000 team members. I'm there to help, quote, fix culture. And I joined then just at the beginning of 2009 during the Fannie Mae, Fannie Mac crazy market meltdown era. It was terrible, but it was a learning lesson for sure for me. So 2009 through to 2012, we're both trying to help fix a culture, build up a culture in which people believed in themselves, purpose-driven, et cetera. And I thought, you know what? Actually, I should write about this. So I started to write and speak publicly between 2009 and 2012-ish. And then I'm doing a talk in Toronto, Ontario, and there was a wily publisher in the audience, one of the publishers, and editor, I should say, sorry. And anyway, so they approached me and said, have you ever thought about writing a book about culture? And I had not only thought about it, I was 4 chapters into a fable, kind of like Pat Lencioni, and it was called The Coffee Shop Leader. And I had characters from kind of my life. We would show up at the coffee shop and riff about what was good and bad culture. And so I submitted that, and they took about a week, and they're like, we've already got Pat Lencioni. Can you maybe write first person? I thought, oh yeah, I can do that too. So my first book, eventually published in the fall of 2013, it was called Flat Army, which is obviously all my books sort of have a play on words. And this is about how organizations are far better when they still keep the hierarchical structure, but it's flat culture-wise, i.e., we're open, we allow rotation, we believe that we are one, even though the buck stops with the boss or the boss's boss or the boss's boss. So Flat Army was number one. Then I realized culture has a very close twin sister, and that's purpose. So the purpose effect came out 3 years later, and that was the yin to the yang. As much as you can have a flat army, you have to have belief and meaning. Well, my argument is you do. And not all leaders, as you know, do, or organizations. And so the point there is it's sort of like a sequel. You've got to have both books in order to inculcate a culture that is purpose driven. So then I realized that why are none of these things being implemented, Avivah? And that is because
despite you writing so eloquently about them.
Well, I don't know about eloquent, I'm writing. And so in working with executives, and now I'm just about to leave TELUS and go on my own, but this third book in 2018 is called Open to Think. And it's also a play on words. It's sort of like, please open the book to think, but one must be open to think. And what I realized, and it's still to this day, 8 years later, the peripatetic, very stressed leader, whether you're a team lead or in the C-suite, in the exco, they're doing a disservice not just to themselves, but the teams and orgs in which they lead. And it continues today, this sort of rife with busyness, stress, do more with less. And it's really impacting both what we see, culture and purpose, but later on, some of the other books that have come out. So basically, I'm a writer that people aren't reading my books and they're not doing the stuff I'm telling them to do. So that's fine. So
that's why you keep writing. You know that one day they will.
Maybe. So book 4, and folks that are listening or watching, there's 6 to date. So I'm trying to get to the 6th one, but hold with me. So the 4th one, 2020, I'd written it prior to the pandemic, but put it out during the pandemic. And it's called Lead, Care, Win. And what I realized potentially why the culture and the purpose and the not thinking was happening was because there's no empathy. And how do we as human beings, as leaders, lead teams such that there's more care, compassion, empathy? So it sort of felt prescient, given the pandemic, that here's this book now that can help people really trigger their own empathy for themselves, their teams, their families, et cetera. So that was the itch to scratch, like, okay, we could do this better, right? This whole like nurturing and belonging and allowing people to feel that they are more than just a number.
Yeah.
So that was 2020. And then kind of because of the pandemic, but certainly my just whole career, the 5th book's titled Work-Life Bloom. And what I realized is that, well, there really isn't any such thing these days as work-life balance. We get that math wrong. So how do we find ways in which for leaders to create the culture and the purpose to allow people to bloom in both work and life? And I make a bit of a contentious, some might say, like argument that it's okay for leaders to actually have conversations about an individual's life. You know, not finances and budgeting and are they having a garage sale on the weekend, but just kind of paying more attention to, you know, their skill development. What do they want to be when they grow up? It doesn't have to be at your firm. You could have great conversations about work life and seeing where they want to go, and so on and so on. So that was 2023. But in 2022, I kind of started writing Work-Life Bloom and this next book at the same time, wondering which one should kind of...
they fit.
Yeah. Needless to say, when I turned 50 in 1971, I was born in 71, when I turned 50 in 2021, that's when I started to think, okay, so what is this age thing? You were an executive at TELUS and SAP. You never really ever thought about age. You're an idiot. But now that you're turning 50, shouldn't you? And why didn't you? So I started self-assessing myself about as being a leader and in charge of culture around these organizations and performance, and really giving myself
a bloomer. It's okay, you know.
Well, but a bit of an idiot too. Like, and so I'm in the book, and the future work is gray. I'm calling out a little bit my own blindness.
Yeah, we're all blind to age until we hit it, I think.
Yeah, but
you're not alone, right?
But maybe this turns into a therapy session of you, because it still haunts me. Like I think I'm semi-smart and semi-good at my job when I'm leading and helping people with culture change, et cetera. But it was a huge blind spot I had to look at and come to grips with. So hence the book, The Future Work is Great, is much a manifesto about what leaders might do to put age on the docket of an important part to culture. It was a Dan, you're an idiot book, and reconciling with what I missed entirely to hopefully allow other folks in their 30s and 40s who are leaders, even 20s, to pay more attention to it.
And I think that's a wise place to arrive at, this kind of shared blind spot that I think we all have, and companies still do. I mean, they obsess over AI, digital transformation, even a little bit still ESG, but the mention of demographics is still coming. It's slowly emerging post-pandemic. Why do you think that is? Why has age become the last big corporate issue no one wants to own? And particularly not if they happen to be on that other side of 50 like you were.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of shiny objects in an organization. And I think perhaps one doesn't have the skill, maybe perhaps even the wherewithal to ask themselves specifically, is age really a shiny enough issue to deal with when you're maybe younger in your career? Even if you're, quote, middle age, it may not be one of those really important things because there's so many, quote, other pressing issues. Now,
and it's rarely shiny, right? It's rarely presented as shiny.
Yeah. And I mean, you know this all too well and more than most people because you've been in this space for so long and a pioneer in it, quite frankly. It's akin to me, at least. If I look at the corporate world, I find often that ageism, aging, the age file is very akin to short-termism thinking.
Yeah.
What do I mean by that? I mean that why would I address some of as a leader, why would I address some of the short-termism problems about EBITDA, about rigging the stock market, about just concentrating all efforts on this quarter or this year in order to ensure that my bonus is hit, that the company's targets are hit? People aren't thinking long-termism.
Yeah.
So what's good for the environment? What's good for society? What's good for community? What's good for the long-term health of this organization? Avivah, that's someone else's problem. It's like politics in 4 or 5 year cycles. So that to me is also potentially a reason why it's not addressed. It's like, we'll worry about that later. That's not a problem for me. I'll be gone.
So you bring up a good metaphor, the idea of age debt. I think that's a good one. From a business standpoint, what are organizations already paying for today because they aren't putting this on their strategic agenda?
There's some organizations that are bankrupt, quite frankly, already. And age debt to me...
Because of their pension debts or something else?
Yeah, literally and figuratively.
Yeah.
So the literal part is, there's been organizations that have had to cancel and or themselves go bankrupt because of their, whether it's defined benefit plans, right, or pension plans, whichever way you call it, and just the way in which that they have not forecast how costly it could be, right, in order to serve their retirees or just their current employees. So literally there's bankruptcy. And then figuratively on the age debt side, what I'm basically getting at are these kind of like 4 files that don't really ever get addressed. And if they're addressed, it's sort of nominal, it's tokenism, right? It's just not necessarily helpful. So the debt I'm talking about when it comes to age basically comes into 4 flavors. So the first is sort of a demographic debt, or ignorance is probably the better way. So because, again, back to short-termism and thinking for the quarter as opposed to sort of the 5 and 10 year plans, organizations don't have a chief demographic officer or a chief age officer, and HR is not really paying attention to this either. Neither is finance, which is weird because you think they would be given benefits planning, et cetera. So they're not thinking about the reality, as you know all too well, again, about what's happening from a sort of plummeting birth rate, but also the fact that we get to live longer, yay. And that it's having a material impact on the organizational culture and makeup. And so when you're an executive in finance, HR, or the exco, and aren't actually aware or paying attention, or no one's informing you, this is those haunting situations that will crop up later on. You're like, oh God, what happened?
Yeah.
So age debt is, to me, invisible, but visible if you start paying attention. So demographic is one, wisdom, experience, intellect, knowledge is another. I hope we get into this, and I'm sure we will, but how often have you come across an individual that reaches out to you and says, you know what, I've been fired, I'm 53, I'm 61, and I don't understand why. First of all, I don't understand why I got fired. Like, am I too expensive? I could have gone down to 80%, whatever. But they didn't even capture what I knew.
Absolutely. All the time, like every week.
Yeah. So there's like blind execution of, what I mean by that, I just mean but on the payroll of someone who's no longer there. But the organization is so blind to the fact that they have executed that wisdom with it.
Yeah.
And now all of a sudden the tacit knowledge, even the specific knowledge that is with that role and the customers or the process, just, right? So that's crazy. So that's age debt. Again, that's another one. The other two quickly, longevity and ageism. So longevity, not paying attention to the fact that team members may not be saving enough for their retirements. And so does that have a psychological, mental, social well-being effect on them? And we're not opening up the Pandora's box of, should we maybe talking to folks about what a long life means?
Not to mention, lastly, not to mention their health.
Yes, yeah, precisely.
As well as their wealth, yep.
Precisely, yes. And then ageism, I've heard, although it's sometimes not sure I agree, but the last of the isms is ageism. And ageism can come in job descriptions and who gets hired, token interviews. Again, how many people have you received over the last several years that said, I've been to my 88th interview and I'm 54 or 71 and I think I'm just the old hire or old interviewer or interviewee, sorry, because they want to put someone on that's older on the panel. It's like, oh. So those are the four blind age debt components. We'll go a bit more into the ageism thing. I mean, because so many firms are claiming they value experience, yet really past 50, that is a bit of a cliff for a lot of people. And we know in countries like the US and the UK that half of people are not fully employed as early as their 50s, not even past retirement age. So why do you think this contradiction persists especially in otherwise well-run companies? Do we really have to wait until everybody passes 50 for there to be a sort of collective wake-up? Well, soon. I mean,
pretty soon we will pass that.
Well, so Japan, South Korea, they're wrestling with this now. Yeah. And the point I make kind of in the book is, having spent about 2 weeks in both countries to do some reconnaissance and some research, I basically call those two countries like the canary in the age coal mine. Yep. And that canary is singing. And so Japan and South Korea's birth rate has been lower than North America's, Western Europe, for a long, long time. They're kind of 10 to 20 years ahead of us, if you will, on rethinking, well, what does work mean when you have fewer young people and more older workers whom want to work and some have to work. Yeah. So there's just some math here that's going on that we're not recognizing that is just coming for us. I mean, I know you live in the UK, and obviously the big news recently-ish in the beginning of 2026 was there were projected more deaths than births in the UK, and that will be now the norm going forward. Well, that happened in Japan in 2001. Right. So again, kind of 20-ish years ahead of where the inevitability is. Demographic
morphing from these old pyramids to these new squares. Yeah, absolutely.
So specific to ageism, I guess it may be the last of the isms, but it is certainly one of the first of the blind spots for leaders these days. And again, it's just not sexy. It's like, nah, it's not a problem. And part of it, I think, was the recognition that wherever you go, the high street, Shibuya Crossing, Piccadilly Circus, you see young people. Like you don't really walk around thinking, oh, wow, everyone's 50 and above, because you see young people. Like when you live in a city of 12 million people, you're going to see young people. So it's not as though it doesn't hit you.
In your face enough.
Yeah.
Could be. Let's talk a little bit about this mismatch between, I always call it the Q3 mismatch, because I find in my 4-quarter life metaphor Most organizations are managing their Q3 talent, so the 50 to 75-year-olds, using a lot of Q2 assumptions, like 25 to 50. In fact, Q2 is the entire focus. That's what they think their workforce is, which has assumptions about careers, motivations, or performance are simply wrong. Now, I love your use of metaphor generally, but you're pretty well generally getting rid of generational labels like Gen X, Y, and Z, and you've replaced it with rivers, rocks, and rubies. So tell us a little bit about them and how managing with that segmentation might help with this Q3 mismatch.
Well, thank you. And I think I have a love affair with alliterations as well. That's probably
yeah, we share that.
Yeah.
Might be a Canadian thing in the water.
Maybe. So this is one of the things. As a chief learning officer, I never really bought into the generational myths that were brought into the workforce. I mean, go ahead and have your fun comedy club or in society with a meme, whatever. Like, that's funny, I guess. But when you bring that into the workplace, whether it's okay boomers, whether it's Gen X are the inventors of cynicism and angry, or millennials, the ones that say, what, you're out of avocado toast? But you bring them into the organization that's demeaning. Go ahead and keep them out there in the X to the workplace. But what I recognize is that whether you're Avivah or Dan or Claire, my 22-year-old, we all go through three kind of Taylor Swift eras in our careers. And those eras, whatever the ages are, like kind of young, middle age, and older, are effectively, some might be in it for 10 years, some might be in it for 15 years. There's no categorical, you absolutely, like a boomer is 1946 to 64. The three eras are just circumstantial to you working. Yep. And you might work in one organization or 11. And so the rivers is really that introduction to you, to that organization or roles. And again, that could be 5 years, 15 years. You're just getting going, whatever the number is.
Yep.
And so fluid intelligence, which is that release of curiosity and creativity, but also the learning of a process and leadership, management skills. Your river ultimately will flood many times, but that's okay because you're in that learning mode, whatever the number is, the years wise. So it doesn't matter your birth year. What matters is you're starting.
Yeah.
And so hopefully
it's a phase of life issue, not an age issue.
Exactly. Yeah.
And a phase of work issue you're pointing to even more.
And you and I can probably look back and reverse engineer. Oh yeah, these roles, what I did here in my river era was informing. I learned a lot. Oh, I wish I hadn't done that. And then we enter what I call the rocks era, and that's sort of mid-career. Yeah. And again, if that 15-year, 20-year, 25, whatever, it doesn't necessarily matter. It's just like you kind of feel like,
you're
all
a
right.
rock. You know when you're a rock.
Yes, you're a steady Eddie, as I say. So you're stabilizing. You don't have to be a leader. You can be individual contributor, totally fine. But you also know that you may be dealing with either aging parents and young kids, if you're fortunate and do have kids. And even though if you don't, you're still in that middle portion of, okay, I still have fluid intelligence, but I'm now my rock era is starting to shine a little. It's not quite the third era, of course, the ruby era, and whatever that means to you year wise. Again, it's not as soon as I turn 45, I'm a ruby or 65. It is just like, I feel like now I've gotten to that point where I have been through 6 reorgs, 5 once in a lifetime crises at work. Yeah. If you're a Rita McGrath fan, you can see around corners. Yeah. It's just that, I've got this intellectual crystallized intelligence now, and I have wisdom. So you're some combination of like Jane Fonda, Mother Teresa, Gandalf, and Yoda. Like you've kind of combined all of these forces and for good. And again, whether you lead or not is inconsequential. It's that I am now in a position to actually mentor, coach, and provide wisdom because of all that tacit knowledge I've built up over time.
It's it's a very nice and it's a very visual metaphor and segmentation. And I think of all the rocks I meet, the middle managers who really feel this in between intense pressure there between these junior pipelines of people coming in, these rivers that are flooding, and this kind of mass departure or ejection of the rubies. How's this demographic squeeze already affecting productivity, burnout, as far as you can tell?
So that's a very good question. So with sort of fewer young people, or even sometimes we might, and I don't mean this to be negative, but stunted rivers in this particular example. So you've got a lot of young people whom have either been pushed out or stunted in the way they've started their careers. And some of that is COVID related for those that are in the age bracket, ultimately these days of 18 to 28, because there has been some of that. But then when we do push out because of costs and EBITDA fixation, older, most of the time, higher paying individuals, then all of a sudden there's an exodus of that said wisdom and that intelligence, the crystallized intelligence. And so who takes the brunt? The rocks. Yeah. So of the three eras, when you do look at it demographically, the highest rising level of anxiousness, of stress, of burnout is the mid-career leader and individual contributor. So why? Because they're having to take on more from those exiting wisdom rubies. There's less of the young folks either coming into the organization, or their map has just been re-architected in the organizational makeup, and they're dealing with aging parents, financially strapped finances because cost of living. Let's talk about that if you want, and their own kids, if they have kid or kid.
Yeah, that joyful midlife squeeze.
Yes, but it's more exacerbated than it's ever been. If you look back to sort of 1950s onward, this particular era is having a really tough go.
Yeah, because we're squeezing the bottom of that pyramid into less and less of the old people you could lean on when you were a rock, right?
Precisely. Yeah.
Okay, so let's turn. We've analyzed, we walked around the ignorance, the invisibility, the kicking out of wisdom, and the sort of blindness to ageism. We've looked a little bit at the demographic reality of these rivers, rocks, and rubies inside. Let's take a look at what do we think companies must start doing now? And they must be doing something, because we're also seeing that actually the increases in GDP we're seeing in countries is heavily weighted towards the retention of our rubies. So rubies are coming back. It may actually be the rise of their era. And your argument is they should. They've got to be managing to move from age debt to what you call experience dividends. So what decisions need to happen at board and executive level? And I assume you think it's not just in HR to make that shift real. What are the three things they've really got to get straight?
So probably by example, I'll suggest, just so you can see a couple of countries and company examples. BMW in Germany, they have something called the Senior Expert Program they've introduced. So they take a look at directors and VPs whom they know are within sort of that 5 to 10 year retirement range. And they go to them and they say, and they've done this now over 50 times. They go to them and say, hey, we'd love you to stay with us. Is there any chance that you'd be interested in relinquishing your director or VP title and responsibilities and becoming a consigliere, a coach, a mentor to the rising rock that we'd like to promote? But you are now an individual contributor. So you get to do stuff that you used to do when you were a river, like an individual contributor. So it's sort of this cycle where you start out river, you lead as a rock, you're a ruby now, and now they're like, you're not on the downside. We want you to continue to be a ruby, but in a refashioned way.
So breaking the upward linear necessary upward progression.
Yeah. And so it's an example of how BMW has taken a look at what is a career ladder. Is that such a thing? And maybe, as I say in the book, maybe there's a way to look at not a ladder, but a canvas. So a bunch of different optionality for you and how to look at team members, whether they're leaders or not. And maybe they have these sort of slow down roles or phase out roles or different ways in which to look that it's like, I'm at the top as an SVP and then I'm pushed out, or a VP or director. So I think BMW is a really good one. What Tokyo Gas does is they took a look and said, again, Japan with its demographic canary in a coal mine kind of point. Yeah. So they have very structured, they introduce structured career development for the 50 ups. And so when you do take a look, you're like, okay, well, again, they've gone through their river rock. They might be entering their Ruby era. Let's just call it that for the time being. So they then find ways in which to redevelop or develop them so that they can take on different roles that might not be, in the case of Tokyo Gas, as kind of blue collar, manufacturing or, hard labor related. And they're taking on different roles that might use the new skills they've developed in ways that might be less laborious from a physical standpoint. So that makes sense when we're rethinking how we still might use the talent, but because they've got all that culture experience, they've got the stories, they know how the company works. How glorious is that as a kind of example? And then I think you're familiar with like L'Oreal and their all generations work. So they're specifically saying, okay, so how do we retain these folks? So they're looking at ways in which to retain rubies, to say, no, we don't want to cast you aside. We're not looking to push you out. So how do we introduce things like part-time roles for you, or contract roles, or specific roles in communities or with other team members to be mentors and coaches? So it's just it's just a rethink. It's just kind of saying, instead of going all the way up the ladder, how do we rethink how we might use these folks in different ways? And again, those are kind of three examples that help.
They're good ones. And my question is, all of them point a little bit to one of what I find companies are always bumping up against when you bring in this kind of flexibilization of their talent management and career systems, is the link between money, age, and experience. I mean, we're all so brainwashed into thinking that, and all the stereotypes of, and realities of age are that they're the most expensive, the most inflexible, the most highly paid, they don't learn, et cetera, you know them all. But the money one is the most particular one. How do you break that? And are rubies really willing to work for less?
In my research with rubies and with organizations, two things happen. They still want fair wage. Yeah. I mean, it's not so. But what I found more so than ever is that when I wrote that book in 2016 called The Purpose Effect, holy smokes, does purpose and meaning mean a heck of a lot more when you're in your Ruby era, because you're not really thoughtfully thinking about purpose in your kind of rivers, certainly your rivers era. And to a degree, maybe not as much as well in your rocks compared to rubies. So when you are able to create a culture that shows that you invest and believe in rubies, but that you want them to feel that they have a sense of purpose and a sense of meaning, it actually doubles down on the fact that they're doing good for themselves and they feel good. And then it doesn't replace the salary if a salary goes down, et cetera, but it gets them to fuel their own inner, I believe in me, which then goes to, as science proves, right? When you believe in yourself and that you have sense of purpose, you're more likely to be healthy, well, and continue with your cognitive advance as opposed to decline. Yeah. So there's all these societal benefits as well when organizations start thinking this way, that I wish government, et cetera, would see, all right, when we do something in this way, we'll actually have less folks that are using and exhausting, whether it's NHS or other wellness care that's required as we age into those older years of our lives.
It also directly addresses the sort of intergenerational tensions by getting the rubies not to park in their senior roles, but actually to shift into much more of what you call the BMW example of mentoring and supporting and knowledge transfer.
As a sidebar, in my home country of Canada, I live in British Columbia. British Columbia, one of the 10 provinces, it has a provincial licensed gambling entity that's part of the government. It's called BCLC, British Columbia Lottery Corp. And what they've introduced are sort of retirement phase outs. Yep. And so instead of, I'm retiring, and so you announce it, on a Monday and you're gone in 2 weeks' time because it's your quote 2 weeks notice, they have a 1, 2, or 3 year phase out program. so that that individual can slowly move from 80% to 60% to 40, their choice, right? They work through it. So the wisdom is transferred. They feel there's like a great off ramp. And they're like, oh, you know what? I'm working towards whatever is my next chapter outside of, in this case, BCLC. But it is, again, exemplary of an organization that still wants the Ruby to contribute, feel that sense of purpose, at least at BCLC, but knowing, they don't want to work until they're 100, fine. But it's a nice off-ramp. And so, again, it's just another nice example where if we were thinking this strategically, other organizations might introduce programs like that.
I'm also wondering, as you read of countries like Denmark who are moving retirement age to 70, if we'll get to the point where we stop calling them off ramps and where you work 40% for that last decade or so.
That's a great point.
Become a chapter rather than a ramp, because otherwise
that.
I don't know how we're going to do it.
It's you know what, and vernacular is really important. So you're right. I think you're dead spot on there.
I don't want to leave you without your introducing your three frameworks. You talk about the career canvas, the wisdom wheel, and the longevity lens. Talk about alliteration. You're going on all guns here. Which one do companies, tell us a bit what they are, and which one companies resist most, or what fear tends to underlie their resistance to them, if there is?
Yeah. So career canvas is setting torch to the career ladder and saying not all people need a ladder. In fact, most of us don't, and that there is a painter's palette, if you will, that we're allowed to paint in all colors of the rainbow, all brushes.
Backward and forward and slide round and round. Yep.
Exactly. Like boomerang back if need be. Take a little gig assignment and what I call spark up, where for 6 weeks, 6 months, you're doing something new and different. And again, what a great way to use rubies is to put them into these neat situational project roles. Yep. So career canvas certainly is, the HR antiquated way of thinking all careers must go up and not necessarily out and around, multi-directional, as you say, then, that's an issue. The wisdom wheel is saying, to our kind of earlier part of the conversation, are we doing enough to mentor or reverse mentor, a river mentoring a rock or a ruby? Are we creating intergenerational, even though I don't like generational, intergenerational is a fine word for me. So intergenerational, inter-age collaboration. Like, are we specifically looking at projects where we want voices of eras inside of the design or the thinking or the action, the execution, all of that? And then again, really importantly, I spent some time with 3 different psychologists who are very angry and concerned about the lack of what they call cognitive task analyses. So, i.e., the capture of how we do things around here so that it is preserved and then it can be transferred and taught to other individuals. That is a big concern. It's probably my number one, I would say, is that we're so ignorant in our orgs of what level of competence and intellect and crystallized intelligence we have. And then we fire people or we let them retire and we don't do that great capture. So that would be that. The third longevity lens, maybe it's quote out there, but longevity lens is for organizations to actually have conversations about, well, what is an age-ready culture?
Yeah.
Like how do we think through our job descriptions? How do we think through our promotions? I'm not against promotions, but are we not allowing the 50 rubies, 55, 60s? Are we investing in them? Are they allowed to take the corporate MBA program? Why not?
Yeah.
All of these little, both raging ageism pieces, a lack of being aware of what well-being is about, thinking about even rivers and the financial situations they find themselves in. So, for example, like if we're not having conversations about not just how long you may live and what monies you might need to retire with, but how long does it take to save up for the down payment of a home or a flat? Like, I don't long. Yes, but I don't want us to get state-like, but I also think that it's upon us as organizations to maybe open up doors to at least express we have an interest in your well-being. Hey, would you like to go take this course at the university or the local college or whatever the institute is? Maybe we want to invest in that financial well-being, workplace awareness and wellness so that we are paying more attention, or at least showing that we care more about the overall longevity lens and health and wellness of the individual.
Well, and educate our large staffs to the fact that they will be living longer and they shouldn't wait till after 50 to wake up to that fact.
Oh my gosh. Well, I mean, you know the data, right? So in the UK, the average male savings for retirement is £110,000, and for females, it's 108,000. It's just not a lot of money. Even with,
enough. We're going to be working for a long, long time. And so the question is how and when and where. Yep.
Exactly. So all of it
we
is...
haven't yet closed.
Yeah.
So I want you to close, Dan. You've thought and written so much about this. Give me a longevity lens 10 years hence, and when talent scarcity, particularly in Europe, in aging Europe is the norm, not the exception. I put Canada in there too. What do you think will distinguish companies that really get the 4 quarter lives concept and have learned to manage their age debt and longevity dividends properly?
I think one of the things we really have to think about is educating leaders about how to be the combination of age aware, but also what I would call age invisible. So age aware is clearly being aware of the fact that it's terrible to fire rubies when you need that wisdom, just blah, blah, all the stuff we've been talking about, and not to, but age invisible is now saying, like, I'm not looking at you as a 24-year-old or a 74-year-old. I'm looking at you as talent.
Yeah.
And when we're age invisible, we are just trying to build the right teams and culture and organizations to serve our clients. So whether your client is a university and the students, whether you're in government and it's the citizens, or whether it's for-profit and it's the things you sell, service or product or both, that is when you're looking at what I call the customer's customer, and you're thinking through from an age invisible perspective. All right, how do we become age neutral and allow ourselves the grace of being an age leader, actually, at the end of the day?
What I call a longevity leader, but I love that combination of they need to become first both aware and then graduate to be kind of consciously competent in making all this natural, neutral, and invisible. A wonderful, powerful way to end. Dan Pontefract, thank you so much for a great book. We'll put it in the show notes. The Future of Work is Gray. And thanks for your time. To your Ruby years.
I can't tell you how much this means to me, and for listeners and watchers, I know that people know that you have been an absolute shining Ruby pioneer in this file for many, many years. I am literally following in the great vortex of your trailblazing and vapor trails that I'm behind. So I wanted to hat to you to thank you, both for our interview, because for the folks that don't know, Avivah is well placed in the book. She blurbed the book, which means she gave a nice testimonial, but she has been just someone I've looked up to for years. So thank you, Avivah. It means a lot to me.
What I loved about this conversation with Dan Pontefract is that he gives language to something many leaders feel but rarely put on the agenda. Age debt is a useful concept because it reframes aging workforces from a soft inclusion topic into a hard strategic risk, a bill that comes due in lost expertise, productivity drag, and a rising squeeze on the rocks in mid-career who are carrying the load as rubies exit and rivers arrive too slowly. Dan's rivers, rocks, and rubies lens is also a quiet revolution. It lets organizations stop stereotyping people by birth year and start designing work around career phase capacity and contribution. And his most powerful provocation, becoming both age-aware and age-invisible, captures what great longevity leadership looks like. You notice the bias, you redesign the systems, then build teams where talent is simply talent. I'm Avivah Wittenberg-Cox, and we are living our 4-quarter lives. For more thinking about the impact of our 4-quarter lives, you can read my column at Forbes and subscribe to my Elderberries newsletter on Substack. Let's design lives that aren't just longer, but better.